and welcome to the SquaMates podcast. This is a very serious podcast about reptiles and amphibians, and I am one of your four co-hosts. My name is Dr. Mark D. Schertz. I am the curator of herpetology at the Natural History Museum of Denmark, and I'm joined by my three wonderful co-hosts, Ethan Kosak.
Hi, I'm Ethan. I am an artist, illustrator, and reptile and amphibian herpetoculturist enthusiast guy. Yeah.
And Gabriel Lughetto.
And I'm Gabriel Lughetto, and I'm a scientific illustrator, concept artist, and paleo artist. And I used to work in herpetology, but not anymore.
Concept artist, that's new. And Hiral Naik.
Hi, I'm Hiral Naik, psychicologist and herpetologist from South Africa.
Wonderful. Welcome back to the show. This is episode 23, and today we are planning to get a little bit into turtles and tortoises, and maybe also a little bit of red listing, all of that good stuff. So thank you for joining us. But of course, we're going to kick off with our first section, which, we don't do like super formal sections anymore, but like, what's everybody been doing since the last episode? What kind of works in progress do you guys have going on? I mean, I've been working, I've taken on some new students here, so that's been a very busy time. Getting students started up is always a delight. And then I spent a lot of last month sick. So that was also something that I spent a lot of time on. A really joyful time. How about you guys?
I let my son talk me into buying another caiman lizard. So we have a baby caiman lizard now. We have Neil Caiman, who's our original, and now we have Nelly.
Nell Caiman?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Have you tagged Neil Gaiman on pictures of Neil Gaiman?
I have.
Yet?
I've actually kind of annoyed him now.
Okay, good.
I didn't mean to, but I think he was like, because I didn't even tag him. It always happens that somebody else will tag him in, like, have you freaking seen this? And it ended up with like a thread of like people photoshopping him small pictures of Neil into my terrarium. So I'm sorry, Neil Gaiman, if you're listening. I know you're not, but if you are out there, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for that to happen.
If you are spectacular, I hope you enjoyed the show.
Yeah.
I mean,
Neil Gaiman is still young, right? I mean, he's still young.
Yeah, he's not full grown yet.
Young.
Yeah. And I'm hoping. So I have a friend
thought
who
we were talking about the real Neil, and I was confused for a second.
See, that happens. Yeah, I know. One of them eats snails. The other one probably doesn't. Yeah.
But did come out as a frog appreciator on Tumblr the other day. So, he's pretty good in my books.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
No, he's my favorite living author, I think. So I was just trying to, honor him in some way. But I ended up, as is usually the case, I ended up
when
annoying
we annoy
him.
our heroes. Is that the sequel to your book?
Never
meet your heroes, and then never annoy your heroes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How about you guys, Hiral and Gabriel? What's been going on?
Hiral?
Man, it's been a busy start to the year. I think crazy for snakes and snake bites. Well, it's the summer in the southern hemisphere, so we've got lots of snakes going around. I had to release a snouted cobra. If anybody wants to see that video, it's on the socials. One cool thing did happen. I received a grant from the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Health, which is
Huzzah!
to do some snake bite work. So
Very cool.
It's going to be an exciting year.
Very good.
That's awesome.
Like, what's the duration and scope of the grant? How much money is it?
It's a fair bit of money.
Good. Wonderful.
But we're basically going to be trying to train up some community members to do some snake handling. I also want to try and train up these community members to do a little bit more on like survey side of things, like herb surveys, just to learn a lot more about what's going on in the landscape. But also, I mean, when it comes to teaching people about herbs, I think it needs to be done a lot more often.
Yeah.
I think even other people working on other taxonomic groups like barely understand what's going on with the herbs. So yeah, keen to do something like that.
Yeah,
that's
really
awesome.
Cool. So that's all community focused stuff, right? So like on the ground, it feels like you're actually doing like concrete stuff. That's a very big difference to what I do.
So you get to teach people like snake hook skills and stuff?
Yeah, so I don't. The center I collaborate with does the snake teachings. I like to say that when working with snakes, it's really cool and it's really exciting. But if you really don't have to, then you don't just rather stay away.
Yeah.
That's definitely a very important thing to remember. I think about that all the time when I'm sending students or preparing students to go to Tanzania or any other place in the southern hemisphere, or anywhere that they could be interacting a lot with venomous snakes. I'm like, if you don't have to, you don't have to. So, for instance, here someone gave me the opportunity to hold one of our European vipers, which doesn't really have a deadly bite, but it has a pretty toxic bite that will definitely land you in hospital. And I was like, no, I'm good. I get to see it up close. That's a wonderful thing. I like to see them, but like I don't have any desire to have that thing on my hand.
You're not Steve Irwin. You don't need to be.
But even Steve, like he was doing he had a goal in mind with that thing. It was for communicating love of the animals to the public. And so he had a reason to be handling them in that sense. Very different experience than, for instance, watching a David Attenborough documentary where you never see the humans anywhere near the animals, but you're...
That is a lot more my speed.
Right.
Than Steve Irwin. I'm sorry to say, because I know a lot of people are defenders of Steve Irwin, but I was never a huge fan because of that. That thing of like bothering the animals and catching them. And
it was certainly very sensationalist.
Not that it's his fault, but I think there were knock-on effects of like down the road. We have a whole generation of YouTubers now who like stick their hand in things for clicks,
which is not necessarily it's certainly not recommendable. And like you have other people who are being bitten by venomous snakes on their live streams and stuff. So we definitely I think Steve's
it's more data for her all. It's fine.
Well, not only that, but also is apart from the dangers from being bitten by venomous snakes, you're just bothering animals, and a lot of times you're just bothering an animal in their natural habitat and creating discomfort for them, which is not cool. So
I think that there was a certain value in like influencing a generation of young people wanting to get into this kind of field and become more involved in this whole field, of for me, certainly, like I was of the perfect age. That stuff was basically aimed at me, and it worked. It was great to be able to see someone who was working professionally with these animals and conveying that love and enthusiasm that was having an effect. Like everyone knew who Steve Irwin was and what he was doing, even the people who didn't really approve of his methods. So I think that there's, I would tend to agree that
I think we could do a whole episode on just this topic.
I
didn't mean to bring that up, but maybe we'll save that for another time. Because I think we all have kind of complicated feelings about that.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I do want to come out there, Hiral, and learn those snake handling techniques, because when you show up to a place in, for instance, Tanzania, and you say, "Oh, I'm here to survey the reptiles and amphibians," people start to bring you puff adders. And I don't want them to bring me puff adders, but if they do, I should have some kind of training in how to handle them. And I've never had any handling like training with with any of the elapids or the vipers, because I work mostly at Madagascar, where you can grab any snake without worrying about it, which is a different vibe. Certainly, yeah.
There's no venomous snakes in Madagascar.
There are venomous snakes, but they are pistiglyphs, so they're rear-fanged, and the venom is really mild.
Not medically.
The only ones that you would really want to be like, you should be more careful of are Liheterodon, which are big snakes, and they are more likely, therefore, to get those rear fangs into your flesh when they do bite you.
That's the Madagascar hognose.
It's a giant
right?
hognose, the three species of large hognoses from Madagascar, which are, of course, a wonderful case of convergent evolution of egg-eating and lizard-eating snakes with the American, both North American and South American hognoses.
That's cool.
They're very cool snakes. I have no qualms about handling them. I find them delightful, but they're often very... They heat up really fast, and because they're so hot, they're really energetic. So when you grab one, you're on there for 10, 15 minutes before that thing is going to calm down and allow you to handle it safely for it and for you in any kind of reasonable way. So it's often like a bit of an exercise. I imagine that's quite a lot like handling any of the large elapids in East Africa. They also hood, so they will raise up and hiss at you and hood at you and stuff, but not to the extent
my Western hognose does that, but she's very dumb. And,
The heterodon approach to self-defense is very much like, I can hurt you and I can't really hurt you, and now I'm dead.
Yeah, she'll be banging against the side of the enclosure every time she sees me, but not out of aggression. It's like she's just I can pick her up and she's fine, but she will try to chew on me.
Well, they are also venomous and pistiglyphous, and they will chew on you until they get the venom in.
I think at least there has been at least one case of really bad envenomation
multiple cases of serious envenomation by heterodon. So don't mess around with it. Don't let them just chew on you, because you can wind up in the hospital from it.
Well, the reason is because like the South American, like Xenodon, like they also have very long fan which they use to puncture toads when they're puffing up. Yeah. So that's why they have those huge long rear fangs.
Sorry, I can only picture a toad going.
Yeah. I suspect that at some point down the road in the hobby, they are going to become legislated because of that, because it does keep coming up.
I mean, certainly in countries where there are legal restrictions on the keeping of venomous snakes, it's only a matter of time. So most of Europe, you require special licenses to be able to keep and breed any venomous snake.
Right.
And anything that's rear-fanged is very much like, because Philodryas is the same. Philodryas is one of the snouted snakes from, I believe it's from Southeast Asia, and they're also rear-fanged. They're also like...
Is that a vine snake?
It's a kind of vine snake,
well, because I know, like, I had a friend who kept vine snakes here in New York, which was not legal. And
but those would have probably been like Prasinahema, right? And the twig snakes and the green vine snakes.
Yeah, the Asian.
Those
vine
are
snakes.
super venomous.
Yeah.
Philodryas is neotropical.
Philodryas is neotropical. Oh, okay. Sorry, I always confuse it with not Goniosoma, but the other one. Yeah, Goniosoma. Boulangerie, which
Philodryas
they're very similar.
Does have very venomous, even fatalities in some.
Oh, really?
In some species.
But that's only some of the species, right? I think. Baroni is the common one in the pet trade, and it's not so bad.
Yeah, and the thing is that Philodryas is not as originally, I think, as you might remember from a long time ago, for a few years ago, it's not monophyletic. So I think it was. I can't remember exactly, but I think it was. It was split a few years ago. I think some of the species that were more venomous or were split into a different genus.
Oh, okay.
I can double check that, but Let me see.
I just, I have been bit by a Western hognose a couple times, and nothing. It felt to me like a bee sting. Nothing really happened other than like maybe a little local swelling, but there's enough there that it's like, if the wrong person,
yeah, sure,
the wrong,
that also it will really strongly depend on how far they get in, because if they have an opportunity to really inject you with those hind fangs, it is probably much worse. But even a small bite from a non-venomous snake often will give you a bit of a bee sting feeling, because they just got like you're having bacteria and whatever introduced into your bloodstream, which is just not where it's supposed to be.
It's the toxicophora thing again, It's
yeah. So Philodryas was divided into two genera. I think it's just two, but one of the species that is most venomous. I mean, I think they're both genera now have venomous species, because one of the species, which was Philodryas viridicimus, which was, had a toxic bite, what is now in the genus Chlorosoma. And Philodryas, I think the other species, which is Olfersi, let me just double check. I think it's still in Philodryas. Let me see.
What's it called?
Second, bear with me.
What's it called?
Olfersi. Thank you. Olfersi.
Well,
that's still in Philodryas.
That's still in Philodryas? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one is
Liechtenstein in 1823.
Yes, that one is pretty toxic as well, and that one is the one that has several report cases. But in general, they all should be considered,
Well, what's interesting on my end is, hobby-wise, hognoses have gone from being kind of a junk snake that nobody really kept to now they're like the in thing to breed. They've exploded in popularity in the last couple of years, and I think we're headed towards some interesting legal stuff happening, because nobody knew they were venomous for a long time. Nobody had, or at least it wasn't widely known.
Nobody has wanted to talk about it, or people have been very dismissive. They're often like, this is just an anaphylaxis or any other kind of like strong allergic reaction, which can happen to anything, right? You get a spider bite or even a mosquito bite, and you have an overreaction, and then suddenly it looks like a bad thing.
I have been bit, and I would say I've definitely had a worse reaction to like a garter snake bite.
Yeah.
Which is nothing, right? Like, it barely punctures the skin.
The problem with that is that that's anecdotal, and Hiral can talk about this, but you need a study which compares bites, that were done in a similar way, because it depends on how a snake bites you, what the size of the snake is, how much of the venom it inoculated. Like, there's so many variables that it's difficult to
might be to the venom, right? Also, I think like there's
also. I mean, you do have, if you're allergic, but it has to be done. A study has to be done of the venom per se, right? Here, I think that's the
And it obviously differs between animals found in the wild and captivity, which is, I think, the biggest unknown when it comes to captive species and people keeping snakes.
I wonder if we'll see a gradual reduction in the toxicity of the venoms of these snakes that are reared without ever actually having to kill their prey, right? I mean,
or even
in the
eating
wild,
their normal prey. Like hognoses in captivity are not raised on
lizard
toads.
eaters, and toad eaters, So that toxicity, I imagine, eventually, because it's expensive for metabolically, it's expensive to produce venom. And we keep these animals in totally sterile conditions where they are often fed on, as you say, totally foreign prey items. I would at least expect that their venoms would kind of slowly, obviously over many, many, many generations, but also bear in mind that the pet trade increases generation time vastly over the wild generation time.
So Hiral, decreases I have a question for Hiral, because it's something that just popped in my mind. Have you found differences in the same species regionally, geographic differences in venom composition in snakes in South Africa. Like, because, for example, in the neotropics, we have rattlesnakes vary the composition of the venom, sometimes even as far as going as neurotoxic to hemotoxic from one region to the other. Have you found that in South Africa as well with some species?
So we don't have anyone working on the venom composition, but I think some of the guys in Australia have done some work on puff adders. So puff adders, for example, are the same species across the entire African continent. Now, we all know that really cannot be the case.
Species in big air quotes.
And even in South Africa, the western part of the country is vastly different to the eastern part of the country. So yes, there's definitely going to be this difference in venom composition.
So you think that also can have some taxonomic, consequences? The fact that they can,
yeah, probably. And also, so I was in Kenya last year, and I got to see some of the puff adders there, and the sizes of their puff adders are enormous in comparison to what we get here. So, I mean, obviously their prey consumption is going to be quite different to what we get here, which means that, the snake bites that they get in Kenya, the impact of that is going to be far worse than someone having a similar bite from a puff adder in South Africa, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It also means that we may require, this has also been highlighted in some of the studies in Asian snakes, where they also found vast differences in venom composition, that you actually need special regional, not just at species level, but you might need regional antivenoms in order to counteract those things, especially if, Gabriel, you're talking about something that has hemotoxic and neurotoxic depending on where you are.
Yep.
That's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, one antivenom-fits-all solution. You're definitely going to need specialist treatments for each of those cases.
That's the case with the neotropical rattlesnake, and it's the same. It's the same rattlesnake species for all South America, which is not really, that's not what happens. So that what we're seeing in those differences in venom are definitely taxonomic. Has a taxonomic importance.
My brain is going back to the herpetoculture side of things, where people either care religiously about the locale or not for these animals.
Yeah, locale is such a problematic term. As well. I interact with this a lot in chameleon breeding. Shout out to Bill Strand from the Chameleon Academy podcast. They've tried a lot to demystify what does locale actually mean. And obviously it changes depending on which group you're working on, but locale is just our very bad attempt at capturing some of that biogeographic importance in evolutionary distinction between these things, whether or not it's at species level.
Because there is no stud book program for captive breeding of most reptiles and amphibians, it's not reliable information when you're, I work with Leachianus geckos, and locale is a big deal with them.
Yeah.
And it basically means that, because if you just give me a gecko blind, nobody can tell you what it actually is,
Especially lychees. I don't want to get too into the lychee thing, but lychee locales are often just like, who knows? I got nothing.
Famously,
also because of the export history, a lot of them came out illegally, as far as I understand. So there's Leachianus are really a problem. The same is not true, for instance, with Furcifer pardalis, the panther chameleon, where you drive for 20 kilometers, you have an animal that looks totally different because the color is really different, and you can really use those color locales as an indicator. The problem is, who knows what the females are, because the females don't show those colors.
I was going to say, a well-versed chameleon person can probably look at a chameleon and say, I think I know where this probably came from.
But only a male. You can't do that in the females, with very few exceptions, I think. So basically, it winds up being a game of, well, what do the females make? And where has the person who exported the animals claimed that the animals were collected, which is often they say.
But now my question is, are the females really not different, or is that nobody has bothered to really look well at the females? Because that's my experience in neotropicalism. A lot of the times I realize that females are different. It's just that the differences are more subtle, and nobody has bothered to look at them.
I think in this case, the dichromatism between the males and the females is so extreme, and the females really are basically all this muddy pink color. I'm not ruling it out, but if it's there, it's extremely subtle. And bear in mind that there are no other differences between these locales. So there's no scale differences. There's no morphological differences, really. Maybe some of the really deep genetic lineages, but in general, it's about like...
They'll still interbreed, right? Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah, I haven't worked with chameleons a lot, so but I assumed, like, so that means a generation or two after that, it's anyone's guess, right?
Yeah, like, we also know that in the wild, some like various furcifer species can just cross.
There's intergrades and stuff.
There are documented hybrids. So it's not very common, but it can happen, and it's not as clear cut as we would like it to be.
Yeah.
Well, anyway,
imagine that. Yeah,
that was a long tangent.
That was a really long tangent. Welcome to the Tangent Show, Gabriel. What have you been up to?
I don't remember anymore. No, I've been working. I just finished a commission for a museum that I cannot talk about, of course. I'm just starting a commission for a museum that I cannot also talk about, but I also have been working on doing some package art for the Beast of the Mesozoic upcoming series of dinosaurs. So the first
beautiful.
one, which is thank you. The first one that is Deinonychus, I just, it was just revealed yesterday. And there's a few more upcoming, so I'm
I love
happy
that you have integrated concept artist into your opening now. That's really cool.
Well, because that's also things to come that I cannot talk about yet.
But... Exciting.
Excellent.
Now we get to play 20 questions, right? Are you inventing creatures for the Avatar universe?
No.
Has James Cameron been in touch yet?
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
No.
Amazing. What about Star Wars? Inquiring minds wish to know.
Let's move on. So,
very cool. That sounded like a definite affirmative yes.
Yeah. I hope there will be. I hope that's gymnothalamids in Star Wars confirmed.
Oh, amazing.
Can you imagine?
A Jimmy-based planet. Just everything's a Jimmy. That would be so good. Cool. I mean, it sounds like a busy time.
Yeah. But I think we should start talking about the show, because otherwise we'll never...
I mean, but like, this is fun. I don't know about for the listeners. I'm having a great time.
Yeah. When have we ever cared about that?
The listener experience is paramount.
Yeah.
But send us recommendations for topics you'd like us to talk about. We're going to talk about something that we didn't get a recommendation for because it just came up. What turtles could you ride or have ridden as an adult human being? Now, adult human being, we're going to take as mean adult body size. 1 second. Mean adult body size, which is 5'10", or somewhere between 5'10" and 5'5", which in any kind of useful indication is...
That's taller than I thought.
5'10" inches in centimeters. That's 177 centimeters down to 165 centimeters. So let's say a 170 centimeter person.
Me.
Okay, cool. And a weight of...
it gives the weight in pounds, my friends, and I'm not going to say a weight in pounds. No.
That's so European.
It says 82 kilograms.
Okay.
63 to 82 kilos are kind of average, masculine to feminine weights. So, what would your options be? So, in terms of modern animals.
Okay. I would start with North America, we've got, I think our largest freshwater turtle would be a alligator snapping turtle.
Yeah, which is never going to be rideable for an adult.
Which is also probably, even if you could ride,
not a
not
good
one you
fun
should
experience.
ride.
No.
But even if you could ride, you're not, because of the weight of the carapace, the way the carapace is, you're still really not riding. I mean, they're so flat that you're just basically sitting on the ground, no matter how big the turtle is.
And about,
it's not efficient.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And I was going to say, too, I think with them, they don't have as much reach as their cousins, the common snappers. Like, they can't bend their neck as far back. So you're probably safe riding on top of the shell if you could get there, but you're not talking about it's not a large enough turtle.
Yeah.
So,
and I think we can say the same thing for the largest freshwater turtle globally, which is a soft shell.
Okay. Yep.
That your clearance from the ground doesn't make the experience worthwhile.
You could potentially ride it in the water. Right?
Yeah.
But I think their neck reaches way further, so you are likely to get bitten.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I would say some soft shells are more ill-tempered than even snappers. Yeah.
I don't think it's a good experience to try to wrangle a giant soft shell. So the largest species of soft shells reach over 1 meter long. Especially what's it called? Raphitos swinhoe is the Yangtze River giant softshell turtle.
That's the one I was
super endangered.
It's super endangered. There are no individuals in the wild, or practically no individuals in the wild.
Yeah.
An absolutely enormous animal, but not rideable per se. Okay, but as soon as we go and talk about the next things, we haven't talked about tortoises. We'll get to the tortoises. But your sea turtles, how rideable is a sea turtle anyway? Unless you go into the water.
Right.
Whereas,
so your battle
if you're riding a soft shell...
If you're riding it into battle, the battle would have to be at sea.
Yeah, right. This is the kind of very highly scientific and accurate content that I think our listeners
I was about to say, why pick a turtle? Even on land, why would you pick a tortoise? I would rather take a sea turtle in the water by far than a tortoise in the land.
Okay.
I mean,
sea turtles swim fast. Yeah. Tortoises are whatever. We're coming here. It's
all right. There are several tortoises that I feel like could carry the adult, at least the 65 kilo that we're talking about for the average adult female that is listed here. Okay, because tortoise legs are immensely strong, and they're very much under the body. They're columnar. Yeah. There's a lot of strength there, vertical strength there. So I think a sulcata or even some of the Aldabrachellis would be able to lift an adult human being sitting on their back. Wouldn't be a good time.
For sure.
But I know people. I knew a girl in school who had grown up in South Africa, actually, and they had a giant tortoise at home, which I presume was a sulcata, and she said that she grew up riding that tortoise around. So when she was little,
sulcatas,
that's a big.
Galapagos more because Galapagos are bigger, right?
Yeah, the Galapagos are even bigger. Yeah. But in terms of accessibility, but actually, the reason I brought up the sulcata is that the sulcata, a lot like Astrochelys inifera, has a really strong. The anterior plastron kind of has this extension that's forked.
It's like a battering ram.
It's like a battering ram. So. Yeah. My point is, Gabriel, the reason you would ride this into battle, albeit at the back of the ranks, is so that, you can have people chanting, what is it? Grant from The Lord of the Rings, where they bring you up to the front and then the tortoise bashes the door down, because they do that.
They do. I know people now who glue air tags to them because they get out so much that's how they know where it is.
They'll knock down a fence for sure.
Yeah, I've seen them walk basically, if it's determined to go in a direction, it will just walk until the drywall gives way.
Yeah.
And I've seen them tunnel through drywall.
Remarkable creatures.
You guys know what Galapagos means, right?
Island of turtles?
Is it here
no,
be turtles?
Tortuga.
It's Galapagos is the word in Spanish, a word that was used. I don't think anybody uses it anymore. I mean, I haven't heard it like that. But is the seat that you put on a horse.
Oh, like a saddle.
The saddle. Oh, because of the saddle. Oh. Interesting. The very reachy Galapagos turtles have that swept up shell at the front that does look a lot like a saddle.
Yep.
Interesting. I would have thought it means something like "Here be delicious turtles" because that was kind of the tradition at the time.
No, Galapagos means that, and actually, that's the word. The islands get their name because of that. Because when the Spanish got to the island and saw the tortoises, they called them Galapagos. And there actually is Galapagos. It's a word that, like in many countries, we use to refer to small turtles. Galapagos.
Huh.
Oh, fascinating.
When this question came up, I should say this was a question that was posed to me on Blue Sky. It was asked in a way where they used the word terrapin, which people use to mean turtle in other places and stuff like that. And in answering this question, I looked up where the word. It ended up that I looked up where the word terrapin came from. It's an Algonquin.
We've actually talked about it before on the podcast, I think.
Yes. I'm sorry.
No
not
worries.
to retread, but
who has listened to those episodes?
But Algonquin was a word for any small, or the terrapin was derived from a word that was basically for any small aquatic turtle. And so I think you have a lot of that.
And it's also became the genus name terrapin, which is used for box turtles, which is hilarious because that wouldn't then really apply because they're not aquatic. Alas.
Yes. So I think we have to move to sea turtles next, right?
Yeah.
And you could probably
you could ride a leatherback. You could have a small family gathering on the back of a leatherback. Like that's a big ass turtle,
1,000-pound turtle, right?
Yeah, you don't have the limitation of the gravity causing problems and weighing down the turtle and not being able to move because you're in the water.
And if I remember correctly, isn't that the record size for the carapace of a leatherback? Isn't that like 2.9 meters, something like that? Let me double check.
That would be really big.
I know that they can be like, in feet.
Yeah, measured 3 meters, which I think is I remember, if I remember correctly, 290 something, 2.9 something meters.
So that's so for us dumb Americans, that's like
that's 11... over 8. That's almost 9 feet.
Okay,
yeah,
for the American audience, that's a lot of turtle.
That is a huge turtle.
I recently, we got a leatherback that washed up on the shore of Danish shore. It was actually discovered by a group of school children on the beach. Super awesome story. And this animal is currently being prepped to go into our new museum as one of the stars of one of our exhibits. So it's currently with a taxidermist being prepared. And that is a big ass animal. It is longer than I am, and I am 186 centimeters, so about 6'3". And I lay down next to that thing, and it makes me look pretty small. But that is barely, like, it is about 2 meters long. That's another meter. Wow, that's a lot of turtle.
I don't think people realize how big leatherbacks are. Most people don't. We think sea turtle. We think like the green sea,
hawksbill.
It's a big turtle,
which are still big. Yeah, they're still big turtles
for sure.
Yeah,
but they have to because they achieve sort of they are gigantotherms, so they need to have a huge size to keep warm because they go into deep waters that are cold. So
got it. Yeah.
And they do. I mean, the amazing thing about leatherbacks is that they'll come all the way up into the Arctic waters and then go back down. Like they reproduce on tropical beaches, but they'll come up and, it's not unheard of for them to be washing up on these northern shores, as obviously evidenced by the fact that we got one here. So, it's
and
remarkable animals.
Jellyfish eaters, right? Primarily?
Yeah. Specialist jellyfish and siphonophore eaters. So, I mean, we're working on a lot of stories about these for the new museum exhibits. But the throat, we have some excised throats, which I'd love to show on the podcast here, but I don't have one to hand. But the throat is lined with these backward pointing spines, which is basically the turtle's bane. But
like
also
a sarlacc.
It looks exactly like a sarlacc pit. It looks exactly like a sarlacc pit. And but so the thing about those spines, they are an amazing adaptation for eating any jelly-shaped or jelly based organism out of the water, but they also make it so because you swallow the jellyfish and the water, and then you spit out the water and you keep the jellyfish inside. But the problem is that plastic bags look exactly like jellyfish. These turtles will eat the plastic bag and then they can't get it out again. So it's been basically there's some papers out there that basically say almost all leatherbacks will have, or most turtles actually have plastic in their stomachs as a result of this confusion and then the inability to regurgitate it, and that very quickly becomes an impaction. We keep seeing whales washing up on beaches as well that have got impacted because they thought that they were about to eat a squid or something and then wound up eating some big plastic. So
that's depressing.
It's super depressing. But anyway, you could fit a small family on the back of a 3-meter turtle.
And that's a living animal.
That's a living animal. It's very, very rare for them to reach those sizes. Did you know? Okay, I've been reading a lot of reading about leatherbacks. Let's have some facts. Did you know that every time a leatherback goes up to shore to lay eggs, of course the males never go ashore, but the females will go up on shore and lay eggs. They lay about 100 eggs at a time, and they do it for like a week. So a female can lay 1,000 eggs in one season and then come back the next year or the year after. They don't always come back year to year. But I thought that when the turtle goes up on the beach, and it's like the most arduous thing that you can ever imagine, because this is an animal that is very strongly evolved to an aquatic lifestyle that is just about scraping by in its ability to get onto this one part of terrestrial land. I thought that it was like, okay, one and done. She's done. She doesn't have to come back. She's good.
Yeah.
But instead, the next day, she comes back onto the shore and she does it again.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Considering that 99% of those baby turtles will get eaten before they get water. So.
But the maturity, the maturation and growth rate of those turtles is insane. They grow about 1 meter in the first year or two. So they go from these teeny tiny little pocket-sized monsters into, 1 meter long, pretty defensible, or almost 1 meter long, pretty defensible little juvenile within the space of a year. Astonishing when your diet is comprised of things that you can see through.
Yeah.
And I think it's crazy that sea turtles are it's one of the few, if not the only, that group of reptiles that went back to the sea and they cannot evolve, viviparity because the shell doesn't allow it. Yes. Yeah. The shell doesn't allow that. So unless they find a way to make the shell really squiggly when they're being born, but no.
Well,
that hasn't happened.
Actually, if any could, it would be the leatherbacks, because the leatherbacks are super soft when they come out.
Yeah.
And the leather, like the shell of a leatherback, really doesn't solidify until well after it's hatched. And even then, it's not solidified at all.
So I got to see some hatchlings go out a couple of years ago, loggerheads mostly, but there was one of the leatherbacks. And just talking about size, they're pretty big when they come out. Good, the size of your palm.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
I reckon.
It's the size of an adult regular turtle. Like a adult freshwater turtle.
A reasonable size for a small terrapin.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, they go from that, and they come out of these eggs. We actually have a beautiful one in alcohol. It's about the size of a baseball pool ball. It's about the size of a pool ball, and it's white. It looks like a cue ball, which is just astonishing. Little that's a small package for that relatively large turtle to unfold from, and then it grows into these giants, which is just so cool. But yeah, so we talked about
living turtle, correct?
Largest living turtle by a lot, by about 1.5 meters. Yeah. Green turtles can get also very big, and I think some of the other sea turtles can get very big, but nothing is getting nothing is even coming close to 3 meters.
Yeah.
It's the size of a car. Almost 1 ton.
Yeah.
Almost 1 ton.
Yeah.
Which
is
nuts.
Bonkers. Yeah.
So that's extant turtles.
Oh yeah.
If we expand this to extinct to any turtle that has ever lived.
Yeah. Then again, you have family vehicle size tortoises that have been running around.
Archelon is similar to a leatherback. Just 3 times as heavy.
Vaguely similar to a leatherback.
Yeah.
Gabriel did the hand wavy thing. Well,
because I think it's been so burned in people's brain that it's just like a leatherback that I think most people think it's just a big leatherback, and that's not the case.
No.
But it has some similarities.
Yeah. It's another lineage of the giant sea turtles.
Absolutely
it's just
different,
that leatherbacks are the only ones that have survived to today. But I think also a very different lineage of the tree. So if I recall correctly, Dermocellidae, which is the family to which Dermochellus, the leatherback, belongs, is mostly just the leatherback and kind of its direct... I don't know if there are fossils actually from the Dermocellidae, but I think Archelon is an entirely different branch, actually really, really deep branch, right?
Yeah.
Within that tree.
Everything with turtles, their phylogeny, fossil-wise, is a mess. So
yeah, it's very difficult.
Gabriel,
so much homoplasy as a result of this crazy evolutionary feat they achieved with their shells.
Gabriel, when we were sort of warming up before this, you mentioned another one that I hadn't heard of.
Stupendemis.
Stupendemis.
Yeah, which is Stupendemis is pretty big. It's not as big as Archelon by any mean, but it's the largest freshwater. I thought it was one of the largest, but it's the largest freshwater turtle, and it's still pretty big. It's about 3 meters long carapace.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's huge for a river turtle, particularly.
Yeah. And then there are at least 2, probably 6, substantially more, but 2 that are easily findable, truly giant tortoises as well. That again, we're going from family car and talking about minibuses now, right? So we have Carbonemus, which I see is from 60 to 57 million years ago in Colombia, and it comes in at about 1.8 meters. So that's 5 foot 11 inches. And then there is another species called Megalochellus, which had a carapace over 2 meters long, and it's from the Miocene and Pliocene of Europe, Pakistan, India, and possibly even southern and eastern Europe. So
yeah, Carbonemis is the same family of Stupendemis, which are all river turtles, like Podocnemis turtles.
Yeah. Whereas Megalochellus is actually a true testudine, so it's a testudinid. So it's a true member of the tortoise family. So it looks exactly like every other giant land tortoise you've ever seen, except much bigger. So it's really cool when you see these fossils, and it's also just like an opportunity to talk about island effects and island gigantism, because these are not island giants. We don't think that they would have been island giants. Some of them are super widespread. So every time you talk about giant tortoises being island gigantism thing. It's not really what's going on. Often it's a holdover from an ancient lineage of giants that happens to have persisted on the place where the extinction didn't happen.
This one isolated area that didn't. Yeah. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. So, Madagascar also formerly had true giant tortoises as well. And we think that the tortoises that were on Madagascar are basically the same thing as in Aldabra. The Aldabra giants are basically the same species as in Madagascar. And there's actually a reintroduction program for giant tortoises in Madagascar because it would have been basically the same thing. And
they also got extinct really recently,
They got extinct on the continent, basically, of Madagascar and persisted on Aldabra or on the Seychelles, where they were relatively well protected. So an interesting case to always bear in mind. And this is the same is true for the Galapagos tortoises. I think there have been some studies that showed that there were relatively, like the Galapagos giant tortoises are very closely related to also very large tortoises from, Western South America that are just not persisting, as far as I recall. So all of these things, to answer the question, to get back to the real core of the matter.
Yep.
There are things that one could ride today, and things definitely that one could have ridden in large numbers in the past, and none of it would be a particularly good time.
Well, thank you. That was a very fun little journey.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well.
And tortoises are very, very strong animals. So I have no questions that even a relatively small tortoise can pick you up because they're very strong. They have really. Yeah. Anybody that has had a small tortoise, and by a small tortoise I mean like about 40, 50 centimeters carapace, can tell you how difficult it is sometimes because they're very strong. So.
Oh yeah, I did some research on radiated tortoises, Astrochelys radiata in southern Madagascar, and those things are powerful, and they will just if they find a dead tree that's in their path, they will just try and push their way through.
I think that's where the battle thing comes from, because they are like little tanks.
Yeah, they are very much like little tanks.
And they will they don't really go around things. They tend to just sort of try to go through them. And I love that. I love that for them.
You could kind of mount. You could mount an artillery on top of one, or
And in my experience, at least, I had chelonoides when I was a kid because they're from Venezuela and they're everywhere. And red-footed tortoises can get pretty big.
Yeah.
And they are very smart. That's one of the most surprising things. They're very, very smart to the point that they can they learn to come when they're cold.
Yep.
Which is insane when you think about it. Yeah.
Awesome.
Because we had them in the garden at my house, and every time we were going to feed them, we called them, and they just will come up from the garden. They learn, and they are very interesting. Cognition wise, one of those animals that I think they have been understudied.
Yeah.
And they're very, very can be very, very smart.
Yeah.
I wrote about this a little bit.
Too.
I wrote about this in a Tumblr post the other day where I was like, the thing about reptiles and amphibians, it's really hard for us to judge their cognition, their perception, and their participation in the world, because they're just working on a different timeline than we are. We're endotherms. We are literally, we can feel time ticking away from us, and we are anxious about it. We want to know, and we are curious, and everything happens because it's a spark all the time. That energy is just coming out of us. Whereas they're just chilling.
Yeah.
And when they get warm enough, they might decide to blink or something. But until then, it's just so it's really hard to bridge that cognitive gap that we have between us and them, because you can't have a game of patience. They're not interested in patience. They are, or for them, it's just waiting until the next thing happens. It's so interesting and so difficult for us to conceive.
What we have talked about animal cognition, reptile cognition before, and I said before, and I stand by it, that I think human beings are really bad at recognizing cognition intelligences that are not like human beings.
Yeah,
we have a bias. We have a very big bias there, and we are just really bad at it historically. So we're surprised when there is something going on there. It's just not. It's different. It's alien to us.
It takes the terminology. I think we should get a guest on, and we should have someone come sometime and talk with us about like someone who really works on this cognition stuff, because it's so far outside of all of our fields. But it would be really cool to talk with someone who really knows their shit.
Yes,
I think Haral. I mean, Haral have experience with the Lapids. We talked about your experience with Mambas being very active and stuff like that, and all those Elapids have a reputation for being intelligent.
True.
But it's again, right? It's like one of those things I don't think anybody's really looked into very much.
No, but it would be interesting to chat to. I want to say some of the early scientists that worked on behavior, maybe snake behavior, but also like lizards and things. Some of them, most of the work published in the early 90s. Because what I'm finding is that there was a lot of stuff done in the 90s when it came to behavior, especially around herps. And then it's kind of changed. And so we don't really know how, it's kind of dropped off our radar. So it would be cool to see, like, if they carried on with some of these studies, if they'd be interested to kind of start things up again. We might be able to get some students working on cool projects and things.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
definitely.
Like from the herpetoculture side, I see a lot of people talking about people who do keep HOTS talking about how cobras and things like that are the ones that they not only are they fast, but they're also smart, and it means they have to be extra careful with those snakes because they're good at escaping, and they learn who the keeper is. They learn to associate the opening of the cage with being fed, and they're not dumb.
Yeah.
No, by far. Anybody that go ahead.
I think captive situations are pretty good because you can provide enrichment, and I don't think enrichment has been taken far enough in a captive situation where we could actually test out maybe a bit more of cognition or what we might interpret as cognition.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and like Ethan said, I think anybody that has kept reptiles has seen how smart some of those species can be. I've had anoles that are super smart, and they learn to associate when you're going to feed them. They learn to associate, to position themselves in a particular place when you're going to feed them. They know how to basically ask for certain kinds of food. It's crazy what they learn. Things that people don't associate with reptiles. But that goes beyond that, because I think we know so little even about their basic functions, what their vision is like, there's so little that has been done. I mean, just to give you an example. Years ago, when I used to work in herpetology, when we did the revision of the family Teidae, the Tiets, one of the things that we wanted to talk about a little bit, because they have very interesting social and social behaviors. One of the interesting things that we wanted to talk about was about a brief summary of some of these behaviors that have been reported in the literature. Very few of those behaviors have been reported in the literature, and I just started following some whiptails that we have nearby, like Aspidocelis sexlineatus, a 6-line race runner that we have that is native here to the United States. And just that one has when they see you, they have this anti-predatory behavior where they move their limbs and they shake their body as they move. None of that has been described in a North American species in the United States, which is very common.
Everybody's backyard when you're up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And none of that has been described in detail.
Yeah. I mentioned getting the baby caiman lizard, and the first day we got her, we took her out of the box that we brought her home in, and mouth was agape, and then the tail was doing this like the lifted up tail, wiggling it around, and I'm like, what is this? I've never seen the subadult do that, so that must be something. But
yeah, it's so interesting.
Oh, teeth have a huge repertoire of signaling. Huge. Yeah. None of that has been described or like talked about, and just following species a few meet like if you just start following a lizard as it moves around, you will start seeing a lot of behavior. None of that has been described, so it's crazy.
Yeah. So for all of those enthusiastic, people looking for PhDs and PhD programs and project ideas,
get on that.
Get on it. But of course, also be aware that we might not be on top of the literature that was published 100 years ago, where actually all of this stuff was described in hyper detail, but only in like Portuguese or only in German. That's very often the case that I'm like, oh, I've got this brilliant idea. I need a thing. Nobody's ever done this before. And then I go and look and I'm like, in 1910, some German guy decided he would publish in like the occasional papers of this museum that doesn't exist anymore on exactly this subject, and he did it in hyper detail, and now everything that I had as an idea is gone. So also be aware that we are only as aware of the literature as we can be, and also have lives. So from there, I think this is a hard transition, you guys. Yeah. But I think we can now try to transition over to talking about the red list, which is not super relevant, except insofar as what we don't know about species is vastly outweighs what we do know about species, and one of the things that we typically know the least about is actually how threatened they are, and yet.
Oh yeah.
So to qualify the following discussion, I'll just say I am in the IUCN Amphibian Specialist Group, so Species Survival Commission Amphibian Specialist Group, and also the Chameleon Specialist Group. And I have done a lot of assessments for the amphibians of Madagascar, together with many fantastic colleagues. And Hiral, you're also on one of the groups, right?
Yeah, the IUCN ACSB Snake Specialist Group.
Snake Specialist Group. Right. So the following discussion comes to you from our personal perspectives and is not a reflection of the opinions of any of these specialist groups.
Doesn't really need to be said, but I am not on any of these specialist groups.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I was, but I don't think I haven't did. Yeah, I was at some point.
Well, okay. So I think the people bandy about the IUCN a lot, right? We talk a lot about How
about for the uninitiated or the lay listeners? Could you explain what it is?
I was just about to do exactly that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so when people talk about how threatened an animal is, almost always they're doing that with reference to this list. This list is compiled by the Red List branch of the organization called the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is itself, I believe, associated directly with the UN or somehow tied to the UN. Don't quote me on that. Yeah. I don't know how they're tied together. But anyway, so the Red List is a global list, and then there are also country-based chapters of the Red List, which are the country lists, the country Red Lists. And those are not always the same thing. Because, for instance, if a species is widespread globally, but all of the populations in a single country have been exterminated except for one tiny population, then you might consider it to be locally highly endangered, but globally, unthreatened.
Least concern.
Least concern. So you wind up with these differences in level. So just to talk about the criteria, or the ranks, there are 3 threatened ranks, and then several levels of gone. So the threatened ones are vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. And then there is extinct in the wild and extinct. And there is, I think, actually a third one that nobody ever talks about. But in any case, those are the ones where like things are not
extinct
good
with extreme prejudice.
Yeah, exactly. Things are not good. Things are bad. Things are really bad. It's almost too late, and it's too late, right? Those basically are ranks.
Well, and also mentioned that some other species have least concern, which means that they are not endangered.
So I'm getting to those ones. Those are the threatened categories, and then there are 2 categories of non-threatened, which are near threatened, which is we couldn't quite figure out how to make the criteria fit this species, and therefore we think it is almost threatened, but not quite there. And least concern, which is, who cares?
These things are everywhere.
And that's basically everything else. So all the super widespread species, and the way that the assessments are done is they're fitted
But wait, there's one more, which is the one that a lot of species fall into, which is data deficient.
2 more. Oh no, I forgot 2. Number 1, data deficient.
Data deficient, which a lot of species fall in there. We don't know what's happening.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And the other one, which nobody ever talks about, but is very important, is not evaluated. NE.
Yeah. We
so
really don't
not
know.
Evaluated species haven't even gotten onto the list yet. Often they're recently described, or for instance, they're an insect, and nobody is like bothering to try to do the evaluation of these things, right? Sorry,
entomologists out there hearing this.
Right, exactly. But that's so relevant, right? Sorry, entomologists. Because what is the list for? Mostly megafauna
charismatic
and megaflora. Yeah. And so it's mostly used for these things that are countable and few species, easy to do. And as soon as you were to apply it to anything that occurs in very high species diversity, for instance, you try to do this in beetles, like why? Like there are so many beetles.
Yeah.
You don't have enough experts to deal with the number of beetles that there are. And that's part of the way that the system works. So assessments are done by a combination of experts on the taxon and experts on how the IUCN works. They basically bring these people together and we make these assessments together. They're often done at workshops or whatever. And so you're often working through a specific group of taxa. Yes, Gabriel.
Can I say something? I just want to say that that's a very bad approach because you could say that insects are kind of like the base of the ecosystem. So if we don't know what's happening with the insects and what insects are going extinct, what we're doing means nothing.
Be quiet, Gabriel. It's not important.
Well, no, but I think, Gabriel, you're making a really valid point. This is a really important point, which is that it matters a lot that we ignore the things that are the base of the ecosystem in a system like this. And my very prejudiced way of presenting this to people who've never encountered it before is that we apply, and I'll explain this as we go through, the criteria that we use to make these assessments into which group does the taxon fall were basically developed for megafauna, and not just any megafauna, but like tigers
giant
and
pandas.
Monkeys and giant pandas. Okay.
Yeah.
So how do things get it? Like, what is a rank, right? How do you get to vulnerable or endangered or critically endangered? Well, if you go and look up IUCN cheat sheet or IUCN reference sheet, you can get a list of the 5 criteria, A, B, C, D, and E, that are used to actually put taxa into these assessments. And they break down as follows. A is a question of, what's the population size? Well, what animals do we know population size or have population size estimates from? basically only megafauna. You can't do that for any random beetle that you catch in a field because we don't have the technology to, like, statistically you can do it, but it's not going to be super reliable. So we don't have population size data for 99.9% of all species on Earth. There are not enough nines there. A lot of nines. B is the most commonly used criterion for all IUCN assessments. It is based entirely on the geographic range of species and the level of threat to that range. So it's not direct threats to the species per se, although it can be included, but mostly it's how big is the range of the species. C is population size again, small population size and declines in that population. D is very small or restricted populations. And E is some kind of quantitative analysis of the actual threat level.
I immediately have a question. I'm sorry. How does this system handle a species, for example, that is maybe threatened or not existent in its native range, but was introduced somewhere and is now thriving there?
Yeah, so for instance, axolotls,
yeah,
practically extinct in Mexico City, where they come from, but thriving in the pet trade and in scientific use as well. Very complicated case. Very complicated, because in the wild they are critically endangered, and in captivity they are, basically the most abundant amphibian that's available. So the answer is simply, it's a very complicated case. We only deal with the wild populations.
Okay.
What we can say is that there is
Well, I mean, even axolotls aside, like there are populations of. I've got to assume there are populations of critically endangered animals in, say, Florida, right, where they don't belong.
Yes, sure.
Well, no, they're not. I mean, we don't have any particular. None of the species that are introduced here are considered
endangered. Okay,
endangered, like threatened.
Yeah, I wonder.
Pythons are not threatened.
But in there, not in there. No. But are the chameleons? Not furcifer, obviously, but I wonder if Trioceras is. Veiled chameleons are threatened in the wild,
I didn't mean
for
to
sure.
Immediately
also,
throw
we do have
a wrench into the whole thing. I just that's where my brain went. Is how do you do? Because obviously with introduced species and climate change changing the way that animals are distributed, those seem like they might be outliers now, but it seems like the system doesn't have a good way of addressing those things.
Yeah, so native and non-native populations are a really big challenge. That is, they're actually listed as part of these assessments. So in order to make these assessments, you basically go through and compile all of the information that you can get that's published or even unpublished on the species in particular. And then you sit down and you look at these criteria. This also includes range maps, and those range maps are usually blob maps, not point maps. If you have a point map, you have to make it into a blob map because that's how this works. And so you wind up with all of this information that's feeding in there, and it is relevant, for instance, how many protected areas the species is occurring in. That's relevant. But when it comes down to it, the vast majority of species are assessed under criterion B, that one related to range size. And criterion B breaks down into two sub-criteria, which is basically how much is the extent of occurrence, which is basically a minimum convex polygon, so a polygon drawn around all of the possible range of the species, including all the unsuitable habitat in between. So for instance, if you have things on islands, the ocean is counted as part of that. And this is a measure of the spread of risk to a species. So the spread of risk is basically how high is the chance that all of the population would go extinct at once.
Okay.
And if you have it on different islands...
So this would be why... So Komodo dragons, for example, are always going to be considered an at-risk species because their range is so small. All of it is
one place, yes.
Yeah.
Even if they have a huge population there, the range size is very small. And this is really relevant for amphibians, for instance, because amphibians tend to have very, very, very small range sizes. within that range, they can be hyper abundant. You could have thousands, millions of individuals, but because you can't easily get a population estimate, we rely on the range size. And that range size is very small because range size is roughly proportional to body size if your vigility is relatively low. I guess in snakes, for instance, that probably is a little looser because snakes are in general rather vagile. And so you wind up with this thing where most of the amphibians are hyper threatened because they have small range sizes.
But that's not necessarily bad.
Small range sizes.
But that's not necessarily bad because the fact that they still have a small range means that any natural disaster
could be exterminated very quickly. It just is a problem when you compare it with other things where like the range size is so small because it's been fractured extremely versus the range size was so small because it's always been that small. So go look at Sumatran rhinos and compare those with a frog that's only found on one mountain. And like your range size can be the same, but the Sumatran rhino used to be found over an enormous area and is now restricted to tiny area, whereas the range of the frog has always been the same. And we don't take into account population size relative to range size, right? So I can fit millions of those frogs in that range, whereas I cannot fit millions of those rhinos in that range.
So we need frog-sized,
not comfortably.
We need frog-sized rhinos, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, okay, where am I going with the rant? The point that I'm trying to make is so there's another side of criterion B, which is talking about the area of occupancy, which is not that super spread thing, but it's actually how many quadrats within this area are actually occupied by the species. And those numbers are but the numbers are fixed, right? So if I'm talking about elephants and I'm talking about tiny microhylid frogs, doesn't matter if it's got an estimated extent of occurrence of 20,000 kilometers or fewer, it's a threatened species. So again, like 20,000 kilometers is a lot of area for a frog, but not a lot of area for an elephant. So applying these criteria in that kind of consistent way sucks. It should therefore come as no surprise that when we do assessments widespread across a taxon that is generally small-bodied and not vagile, like frogs or other amphibians, we wind up with the announcement, as came out earlier at the end of last year, of this paper that was led by Jennifer Lutke-Swanby, that was published in Nature, made the cover of Nature, and like a dumbass, I don't actually have it here in my hand to hold up. I have my own copy of it, but this paper where we announced that amphibians are the most threatened animals in the world. So I was involved in this as an assessor for the part of the assessment team for the amphibians of Madagascar, which was a lot of hours of everybody who's doing this is basically an unpaid volunteer who's contributing their time and their expertise to this matter. And the overall conclusions from that paper are truly astonishing. So, first of all, like the main takeaway is that it's not a good time to be an amphibian. Like it's just not. We have multiple different epidemics going on that are knocking out amphibians. You've got the chytrid already, BD, which is bad enough. Batrachochytrium dendrobatitis. Any excuse to knock out the full name. BD is a serious problem. Now B-Sal Salamandrivorans is going at the European salamanders like crazy and is a huge threat to everything else. Yeah. And then we also have rhinovirus affecting things in large numbers. So it's not a good time to be an amphibian.
Plus
also,
aside from habitat
loss
destruction,
and climate change and blah 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 blah. Right?
Yeah.
All of these things are kind of feeding into it's a really bad time to be an amphibian.
But it's by any measure, right? Like really no matter how you slice this.
By any measure. But with the big asterisk of what I've just explained before, which is that under these criteria that are used without changing how we use the criterion or how we use the criteria.
But let me ask you something.
For all of these different things.
Number-wise, aren't there more amphibians which are considered extinct than, for example, let's say mammals? They are. There are more amphibian species that are considered currently to be extinct in the last 20 years than mammals, by far.
Yes, then
just
mammals,
like half of Atelopus is extinct.
But birds, no, I would guess.
I
because
don't think
we have
so, because
seen the extinctions of the native avifauna of Hawaii and New Zealand,
but half of the genus Atelopus is basically extinct.
Yeah, but half of the genus Atelopus is extinct in need of confirmation, and this is a problem because they keep rediscovering them. So it's like, definitely, I mean, there's no question that the chytrid situation in Australia and South America knocked down populations and knocked out several species, and that was unprecedented, and certainly way worse than most of the other effects that we've seen. But I do think that, for instance, island birds have suffered to a very similar extent, not due to viruses or fungi, but due to rats and cats and humans in general. So it's like we're just like eradicating a lot of things. But certainly, I mean, Atelopus is a flagship group. There have been many other groups in those areas that have also been knocked down very strongly. We are seeing recovery of some, but others are just not at all.
Most.
Most. Well, most, I don't know about most. A lot of them really just need to be, like, we need people to go and survey for them. So a lot of them have, like, not been seen. And this is another question. So there's this whole project for rediscovery of lost species. And they defined as a lost species a species that hasn't been seen in, I believe, 10 years. So, like, 10 years is nothing. It is so easy to not see a species for 10 years because you haven't looked. Like, most species are not seen on a 10-year basis because that's not how observation works, especially in remote places. That would basically qualify most of the things in Madagascar, for instance, as lost. But they're not lost. They're still there. It's just that nobody's gone to look for them because, like, we don't organize trips to the same place every 10 years.
They're like the Entwives.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, they're not like the Entwives because the Entwives are truly lost. That's for my other podcast. So, I think that's a silly criterion to use in order to really establish this, like, what do we consider lost and what's not. But I do think that it's relevant. Has there been an effort to search for it, and that effort has been unsuccessful?
So what you're saying is stop looking for thylacines.
Yes.
They're gone.
Yes.
And start looking for frogs.
Gastric brooding frogs.
Yeah.
I know that there have been efforts to search for them. And I believe also, Jody Rowley, shout out to her, she's amazing.
Yeah.
Jody had posted a huge amount about searching for the pepper tree frog in Australia as well. And I don't remember if they had success or not. I don't think that they did. But, like, those kinds of efforts, that's where we should be investing a lot of stuff, because I think, those are really lost species. And in many cases, what we're talking about are a species that nobody's really looked for, or nobody has, mostly nobody has looked for, and we've just accepted, it's kind of gone. But some of them have really, really low detection rates. Any microhylid, for instance,
but I'm also
detection
not joking
is low.
in that, like, there's an irony there where it's like, we're looking for something like a thylacine that's this very obviously, not there anymore.
Yeah. And why are we investing that money and time into resurrecting species that are extinct?
Right. Yeah.
Versus,
trying to revive mammoths when you
pisses me off so much.
I know, same to me.
Because it's like, we can't keep fucking elephants alive that are supposed to be here, and you want to bring back mammoths. Fuck you.
It's true. Yeah, I agree.
So
I agree
our attempts to be a family-friendly show are we're not that good at it yet. I also said shit already this episode. It's all good. But, like, I agree. I think that anybody who's just, because they're doing it for ego and they're doing it anyway, we don't have to get into those weeds so much. I think that the key that I want people to take away from this is the criteria that we use are highly flawed, and anybody who wants to do a better job should try to do a better job. That being said, with the criteria that we have, the situation is not good.
Let me
I do think that if you were to do this, let's say for your favorite insect group, you would very quickly find that a lot of those insect groups, weevils for instance, weevils are so specific to the plants that they live on. You go and do this for weevils, I think you'll find exactly the same pattern in weevils, and suddenly weevils will be the most threatened group in the world.
Haven't there been reports recently that because the entomologists have been reporting on the overall mass of insects have diminished noticeably.
Yes.
And that's a huge problem. This is very bad. People don't understand how bad that is. It's worse than losing a rhino. It's worse than losing it's way worse.
And it's directly observable.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know. So I would love to know, Hiral, how your experience of this is, because in Europe, it used to be that you would go for a 4-hour drive, and then you would have to use a squeegee to wipe all of the dead bugs off of your windshield. And that isn't the case anymore. Like, they're gone.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
How is it in South Africa? Is it that bad?
Yeah, it is bad. And I've talked to people who pretty much have lived in the area where I am, and it's pretty wild. I mean, so one of the things I've noticed, like I used to stay about 15 kilometers away from the place I'm living now. I'm much closer to the mountains, which is a bit more wild. There's a lot more insect diversity. The place I used to stay closer to town, there were a lot more farms around, and the insect diversity was much lower. And that's 15 kilometers. I mean, you can immediately start to feel that difference.
Yeah.
And I mean, researchers that have visited over the years have pretty much reported on the fact, especially a lot of people came to South Africa over the last couple of years doing amphibian research specifically, because you're going out at night and looking for herps, and you start to immediately notice the difference. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting that we're seeing, we as millennials kind of have gotten to observe this shift very pronounced over the last 30 years. Yeah. But I wonder how it is for those, Gen Z who have come up actually on the other side of it. You don't have that direct observable
reference
of what it was in the before times. You don't have the experience of
this is a problem that's been going on for a long time. I think and I think as millennials we aren't aware of the population densities that came before us.
Before that, for sure. For sure.
And it's a frightening thought.
God, that's depressing.
Well, to give you an example, there is where I was born in Venezuela, and I was born near Caracas, which is the capital. There used to be this Atelopus species that was super, super common in that area, which is Atelopus cruziger. And it used to be so common that people used to go out and collect 200, 300 a night because it was everywhere.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, it's such a beautiful, frog. It's like bright yellow with black markings. It's very, very, it's like all Atelopus. It's very eye-catching. And I was so interested, and I lived in the area where it lived, and I was very interested in finding it, and I looked for it, and never, saw it, because by the time I was growing up, that species was basically already very, very limited to very small ranges, and it was basically gone by that point. Now it's been rediscovered in tiny, tiny places, but that gives you an example, something that, 60, 50 years ago was everywhere.
Yeah.
By the time I was growing up, wasn't there anymore.
Yeah. I see it we go every year to watch the spotted salamander migration happen locally. And I've been doing that for 20 years, 20 some odd years, and every year. And there's definitely a marked decline. Even in the last 10 years, I would say, we find fewer and fewer of them out.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's clear that these things are doing very badly. The amphibians are doing very badly, but I think, Gabriel, your point that the insects are doing worse is it almost goes without saying, but it is such an important point because it's easy for us to point at the numbers from the paper and say, look how badly the amphibians are doing. But it's very hard for people to bear in mind what has not yet been assessed. And the point that we should always keep in mind here is a lot of the stuff hasn't been assessed. Whether or not it makes sense to assess everything with inappropriate criteria is kind of for the general public to decide and for policymakers to decide. I personally would love to see attempts to develop new criteria that are based on, taxon and size corrected measures, because you could do that, like statistically having weighting factors for how you weight, how you assess things. And part of the problem is that we're trying to put these we're trying to shoehorn things into these very broad criteria, and also something that's assessed as endangered under a population-based criterion might not be considered endangered if you used a distribution-based criterion. And are those things equivalent? Is this one also critically endangered just because the population size is different? So I think the point that I wanted to make, and I think the thing that I would like listeners to take away from this, is that you should be aware that the IUCN is a flawed toolkit doing its best, right? We're doing our best as assessors, working with the criteria that we have, that everybody has agreed that it's kind of like these are the things that we use to get numbers onto the threat levels of these taxa. Sometimes I wonder whether or not it's worth our time, but in the long run, having those assessments for all of their flaws is often more valuable than having them unassessed. Because with the assessment, I can go to a policymaker, and with the assessment, the governments can start to regulate, which sometimes is an inconvenience, but it's mostly an inconvenience that born out of necessity, right? So, I want to end on a note of positivity, I think. And now I want to bash data deficient and non-evaluated species. So, Hiral, what is it that when you guys are assessing species, how do they approach data deficient? What is your, do you know what the official line is toward the use of the criterion data deficient?
No. I mean, I haven't been a part of too many assessments, but usually it is just kind of neglected. It's just like, oh, okay.
We've
think about it another time.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of it, right? And in a previous episode of the podcast, I think it was episode 13, but don't quote me on it. I don't have the window up anymore. But in a previous episode of the podcast, I mentioned as part of a breaking news segment that I'd had a paper published talking about data deficient species. So I don't want to rehash that too much. Everybody should just go and listen to our entire backlog. But I think that the important thing to bear in mind with data deficient species is that when we assess a species as data deficient, what we're trying to say is we don't know. We don't know enough about the species. We need more research before we can get a good assessment. And what people instead do is say, these people were indecisive, or what they interpret it as is these people were indecisive. Maybe the data's all there, but they just didn't know how to use the criteria. And so you wind up with studies that are trying to infer the threat level of a data deficient species, where in many cases, for instance, if there's sometimes you want things to be data deficient because the taxonomy is not resolved. And it's not possible to put a criterion onto something that could be 4 species or 1 species.
Isn't that what happened with with Andreas, I think.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think. I know, remember that paper came out, we talked about it, where the Chinese giant salamander was declared to be it was declared to be like half a dozen species now, and I think they had to scramble to but I think there's some protection in there for anything that's of that genus or something.
Well, you can do that at CITES. So for the conservation,
that's what I was thinking of.
For the Committee on International Trade of Endangered Species, or I don't remember what the C stands for, but anyway, CITES. They protect species in the international trade, and they can protect things at genus level. But there is no genus level IUCN possibilities, as far as I know. You can do subspecies and species, but you cannot do genera.
So that does mean that like a taxonomic change
has a huge impact.
That is the importance of taxonomy.
That's why the importance of taxonomy. And by what I have argued in this paper previously, and that I talked about it previously on the show, is that by declaring these things as data deficient, because we know that they're in need of a taxonomic revision, we can say taxonomy has importance and priority. And we don't do that currently. It's actually actively discouraged. In fact, the active policy for instance, the amphibian assessment, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'm going to say it, is basically under no account or only with serious argumentation can you assess things as data deficient. So if you have really good justification, you can do it, but in most cases, an assessment of some kind was forced through, which means the other problem with the assessments is that we have no quality measure. We don't know to what extent. How good is that map? How good is the assessment based on the population size? Like, there is no indication of a quality measure associated with red listing. And I would love to see that changed, where we have an indication of, okay, Sumatran rhinos, every single individual is known scientifically. I think that's true. Some of the tiger species the same, right? So in these cases where you have a name for every individual, that's like the worst thing that can possibly happen to a species. At that point, you're in trouble. Then you really need active, stuff going on. If you have a small population and you don't know how reliable that population actually is, or if you have a small range size, you don't know how reliable that range size is, we need to be able to tell you, like, you need to be able to see what's the difference between a Sumatran rhino versus, an Atelopus that nobody has looked for in 20 years. Like, those two things are very hard to compare, and both of them can be critically endangered. But, like, I know all of the Sumatran rhinos by name, and I don't know if this forest still exists because nobody's been there to check that the satellite's not, like, up to date or whatever. So
I think also you're right in that, like, this is a system designed for charismatic megafauna.
Yeah, right.
Well, and also I want to say that Atelopus might not be the best example to use because there are a lot of people working on Atelopus and looking for Atelopus.
Sure.
A lot of people working
and a lot
in
of
the
efforts to go and rediscover things. That's definitely
particularly
true.
Atelopus is one of those that really a lot of people are looking for them. I know many of them.
Let me give you a different example then. Let's take Wakea. Wakea madinica, a tiny frog from Madagascar that is probably extinct, but nobody's gone to look recently.
So microhylid?
It's a mantellid, actually. It's the sister group to Mantella, a little tiny brown frog. And I think it's listed as critically endangered. It's only known from one forest. But, the amount of data that we have on that is basically nil, but we call it critically endangered. That's not the same thing as critically endangered, but we know every individual, or critically endangered, but we've been doing population studies for 30 years, or critically endangered and we, study all of the interactions between the populations like orangutans.
So what would you classify that one as? Data deficient?
Well, I would just say there's a difference between a 5-star critically endangered, we definitely know that this thing is seriously in trouble, and a 1-star critically endangered where we have no data at all and desperately need to go and do more research on this thing. Right?
Because I'm think
imagining
there might be
this is an axes type of deal.
I think there might be also a difference in how amphibians are treated. And you, Hiral, can probably back me up on that, and reptiles, because I remember when we were doing some of the UCN thing for reptiles, for example, snakes, and this, Hiral, the populations are, it's hard to find snakes. So a lot of times you don't know what's happening with the snake. You have like one specimen here, one specimen there, and there's no way of counting a population, right?
Yeah. Cryptic doesn't mean rare necessarily, right? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
No, I mean, we've got this one mountain adder that also just occurs in the Drakensberg mountain range. But, there's no effort going into trying to survey it, try and rediscover the species. So, which category does it really fit under?
Yeah, and it's way easier to find a frog that is calling, for example, than to find a snake that it's just, it's hard to find always.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We know that snakes require special detection curves also for various different population density analyses and everything, right? Because they're so hard to detect, obviously, often in the environment.
This is the kind of... Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
And then there's snakes that are just so abundant that pretty much everybody thinks, everything is least concern. So, but, are they facing as a threat? Like, probably, but, now we can't really, there's no reason to really do any assessments on those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We only do assessments on animals that are clearly on fire, in trouble. And
which is all good until you wind up realizing, that was a species complex and we lost one of the species already.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like off in the way. But I think to back to Gabriel's point there, the way that the criteria are applied, I say I'm in the chameleon specialist group, and the way that the criteria are applied for chameleons is fundamentally different from how they were applied for frogs. And the way that they're applied for frogs in Madagascar, because it's regional groups. I'm on the commission for Madagascar. The way that it's done in Western Africa or Eastern Africa or Southeast Asia or whatever is super different, which means that the people who are at the higher levels, so Jennifer and her team, they are trying to make it as consistent as possible. But we know that there are different ways that different teams are treating that information. So, with that, these really fun topics today, I enjoyed this a lot. I hope that you, the listeners, have as well, and also you, my co-hosts. I thought it was very cool.
I had a terrible type. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh God. So that'll bring us to the end. Thank you so much for listening. Let's go through. Gabriel, where can people find you on the internet?
I am on Twitter, X, whatever it's called right now, and on Blue Sky, and on Instagram, all as Serpent Illus together.
SERPENILLUS.
Exactly.
And Hiral, where can one find you?
So I'm on X and Blue Sky at Hiral Nike 25, and on Instagram as Hiral Pie.
Awesome, Ethan.
I'm at Black Mud Puppy almost everywhere. I'm tending to be on Blue Sky more than anything else these days, but I'm around. And
you can
find me.
Ethan with your bad and hot takes on.
Yeah, please do. We love them.
You can find me at Mark Scherz, MarkScherz, on most of the things except on Facebook, where I'm at MD Scherz because I'm bad at things. You can follow the podcast all over the place at SquaMates Pod. We are on most of the platforms. Go and find us. Thank you so much for listening. This has been an episode, and as we say on the show, Hakuna
Squamata.
Oh, and by the way, you can also find the show notes at SquaMatesPod.com.